Hi, everybody. I think I'm live. If anybody is watching this, feel free to chat at me and let me know if you can hear me all right and if you can see me all right and all that stuff. This is my very first live stream thing. I've never done it before, so let me know. No one's chatting, but I can see people are here. I can see that you're watching me. So that's fine. I still have a few minutes before I start. So again, if anybody wants to let me know how it's looking, that would be great. Maybe you can't see me. Maybe you can't hear me. I don't know. Actually, my microphone doesn't seem to be picking up anything at all. Let's see. Everything's, how do I sound? Can you hear me? For some reason, the microphone's not lighting up. Oh, great. Okay, well, I said that 6 times then. I'm a fucking idiot. Hi, everybody. Hi, thank you for joining me. This is so exciting. And it's my excited motion. It's universal. I think everybody knows that. Oh, thank you, Sylvie. You are thinking. You know how to do story time, my friend. That is correct. In fact, I invite everybody to drink during this because the drunker you get, the more erudite and eloquent I become. Call me Dr. Nick, because that's like a copyright violation from the Disney Corporation now. This is so fun. Thank you all for coming to my den. I'm all a Twitter. Oh, I'm all a YouTube, I guess. I'm gonna wait before I start. Oh, I'm not wearing a watch. Oh, Jesus fucking Christ. Okay, well, I'm going to give us a few more minutes before we start. Again, I'm so grateful for all of you being here. Hi, Haley. Hi, Haley, and hi, Sam. I don't know if I said that earlier. And Dave, of course, my ubiquitous friend. Well, I'm always happy to see you. And Bird, responsible level. You have a lot to be responsible for, Dave. You know, you're an essential guy. I don't want you vomiting on the station and being quarantined. That's good. So keep with Pabst. Rheingold is also good. That's the dry beer, from what I understand. Do you see those cheekbones? My whole body hangs off those cheekbones. All right. Well, I guess we can get started reading the story. So this is a story called The Nose. Oh, good. Yes, everybody feel free to spark up too as it goes along with the drinking. Just basically, the more inebriated you are, the more you'll enjoy both my voice and the story. So, oh, and look, there's like a little reunion happening here in the chat. Bird and Silva, they found each other. That's so beautiful. That's so nice. I'm probably going to turn the chat off when I'm reading because I'll keep stopping to comment. So, in fact, I just stopped now and I was about to start telling the story. So here's the thing. I want to give a little bit of background on the guy that wrote this, Nikolai Gogol. He's a Ukrainian-born farmer. And his first set of books were these very like Little House on the Prairie type books. I'm going to turn the chat off because I'm just going to keep getting distracted. Pop out chat, toggle chat participants. Wait, can I just make it go? Whoa. Okay. Oh, okay, great. Hey, great. Okay, so you're gone. So Nikolai Gogol, the author of our story tonight, was born a Ukrainian farmer, which has got to have been a lot of fun. And his first series of books were about that experience, and people really ate him up. But as usually happens, the more he traveled, the more interested in things other than farming he got. He ended up falling in love with Rome and being very inspired by a lot of the great plays and the great myths and whatnot. And as he traveled, his work became more absurd and satirical, and he was finally, his contemporaries viewed him to be like the pinnacle of political satirism in Russia in the 1800s. One thing to note, he never married. He didn't seem to have many girlfriends, but he was painted 8 times by 8 different male painters. So you can do with that information what you would like. So that's just a little bit of Nikolai. He was born in, I'll make it up, 1802 and died in 1856. Those aren't the actual years, but they're a close approximation to what I read on Wikipedia this morning. So I'm going to start reading in just a second. Again, if you're just joining us, I want to thank you so much for coming to my den. I'd like you to meet my co-host, Errol. He travels with me and hangs with me. I invite you to get a little drink. I, of course, am drinking Moet Chandon, which is the official champagne of Knave. And I want to thank you all for doing this, coming to this because it gave me a reason to take a shower. So, without further ado, let me refresh my glass and we will begin Nikolai Gogol's classic absurdist tale, The Nose. You know, if I had thought ahead, I would have had like light classical or something playing in the background. So my apologies. I feel like I really missed a beat there, but you can hum along if you want. If it's Russian, so just the Nutcracker, I'm sure will do. Okay, The Nose by Nikolai Gogol. An extraordinarily strange thing happened in St. Petersburg on the 25th of March. Ivan Yakovlevich, a barber who lived on Voznesny. I'm also going to say the more I drink and smoke, the worse these names are going to get, because this is some high late 18th century Russian names, and I am a very, very Western European kind of a guy. I'm very much a Smith and Jones kind of a fellow, so do bear with me on some of this. I'll begin again. An extraordinarily strange thing happened in St. Petersburg on the 25th of March. Ivan Yakovlevich, a barber who lived on Voznesensky Avenue, his surname has got lost in all that his shop front signboard shows as a gentleman with a lathered cheek and the inscription, "We also let blood," woke up rather early one morning and smelt hot bread. As he sat up in bed, he saw his wife, who was quite a respectable lady and a great coffee drinker, taking some freshly baked rolls out of the oven. "I don't want any coffee today, Praskovya Osipovna," said Ivan Yakovlevich. "I'll make do with some hot rolls and onion instead." Here, I must explain that Ivan Yakovlevich would have really liked to have some coffee as well, but knew it was quite out of the question to expect both coffee and rolls, since Praskovya Osipovna did not take very kindly to these whims of his. "Let the old fool have his bread. I don't mind," she thought. "That means extra coffee for me." And she threw a roll on the table. Ivan pulled his frock coat over his nightshirt for decency's sake, sat down at the table, poured out some salt, peeled 2 onions, took a knife, and with a determined expression on his face, started cutting one of the rolls. Oh my. When he had sliced the roll in 2, he peered into the middle and was amazed to see something white. Ivan carefully picked at it with his knife and felt it with his finger. "Quite thick," he said to himself. "What on earth could it be?" He poked 2 fingers and pulled out a nose. He flopped back in his chair and began rubbing his eyes and feeling around in the roll again. Yes, it was a nose, all right, no mistake about that. And what's more, it seemed a very familiar nose. His face filled with horror, but this horror was nothing compared with his wife's indignation. "You beast! Whose nose is that you've cut off?" she cried furiously. "You scoundrel, you drunkard! I'll report it to the police myself. I will, you thief. Come to think of it, I've heard 3 customers say that when they come in for a shave, you start pulling their noses so much. It's a wonder they stay on at all." But Ivan felt more dead than alive. He knew that the nose belonged to none other than the collegiate assessor Kovalyev, who he shaved on Wednesdays and Sundays. "Wait a minute, Praskovya. I'll wrap it up in a piece of cloth and dump it in the corner. Let's leave it there for a bit, then I'll try and get rid of it." "I don't want to know. Do you think I'm going to let a sawn-off nose lie around my room, you fathead? All you can do is stop that blasted razor of yours and let everything else go to pot. Layabout, Nightbird, and you expect me to cover up for you with the police? You filthy pig, blockhead, get that nose out of here, out! Do what you like with it, but I don't want that thing hanging around here 1 minute longer. Ivan Yakovlevich was absolutely stunned. He thought and thought, but just didn't know what to make of it. I'm damned if I know what's happened, he said at last, scratching the back of his ear. I can't say for certain if I came home drunk or not last night. All I know is it's crazy. After all, bread is baked in an oven, and you don't get noses in bakeries. Can't make head or tail of it. Ivan Yakovlevich lapsed into silence. The thought that the police might search the place, find the nose, and afterwards bring a charge against him very nearly sent him out of his mind. Already he could see that scarlet collar beautifully embroidered with silver, that sword, and he began shaking all over. Finally, he put on his scruffy old trousers and shoes, and, with Praskovya Osipovna's vigorous invective ringing in his ears, wrapped the nose up in a piece of cloth and went out into the street. All he wanted to do was to stuff it away somewhere, either hiding it between two curbstones by someone's front door or else accidentally dropping it and slinking off down a side street. But as luck would have it, he kept bumping into friends who would insist on asking, "Where are you off to?" Or, "It's a bit early for shaving customers, isn't it?" With the result that he didn't have a chance to get rid of it. Once he did manage to drop it, but a policeman pointed with his halberd and said, "Pick that up. Can't you see you dropped something?" And Ivan Yakovlevich had to pick it up and hide it in his pocket. Despair gripped him, especially as the streets were getting more and more crowded now as the shops and stalls began to open. He decided to make his way to St. Isaac's Bridge and see if he could throw the nose into the River Nevo without anyone seeing him. But here I am rather at fault for not telling you something about Ivan Yakovlevich, who in many ways was a man you could respect. Ivan Yakovlevich, like any Russian working man, was a terrible drunkard. And although he spent all day shaving other people's beards, he never touched his own. His frock coat, Ivan Yakovlevich never wore a dress coat, could best be described as piebald. That is to say, it was black, but with brownish yellow and gray spots all over it. His collar was very shiny, and 3 loosely hanging threads showed that some buttons had once been there. Ivan Yakovlevich was a very phlegmatic character, and whenever Kovalyov, the collegiate assessor, said, "Your hands always stink," when he was being shaved, Ivan Yakovlevich would say, "But why should they stink?" The collegiate assessor used to reply, "Don't ask me, my dear chap. All I know is they stink." Ivan Yakovlevich would answer by taking a pinch of snuff and then, by way of retaliation, lather all over Kovalyev's cheeks, under his nose, behind the ears, and behind his beard. In short, wherever he felt like covering him with soap. By now, this respectable citizen of ours had already reached St. Isaac's Bridge. First of all, he had a good look around. Then he leant over the rails, trying to pretend he was looking under the bridge to see if there were many fish there, and furtively threw the packet in the water. He felt as if a couple of hundredweights had been lifted from his shoulders, and he even managed to produce a smile. Instead of going off to shave civil servants' chins, he headed for a shop bearing the sign, "Hot meals and tea for a glass of punch." Suddenly, he saw a policeman at one end of the bridge in a very smart uniform, with broad whiskers, a 3-cornered hat, and a sword. He went cold all over as the policeman beckoned to him and said, "Come here, my friend." Recognizing the uniform, Ivan Yakovlevich took his cap off before he had taken half a dozen steps, tripped up to him, and greeted him with, "Good morning, Your Excellency." "No, no, my dear chap, none of your excellencies. Just tell me, what were you up to on the bridge?" "Honest, officer, I was on my way to shave a customer, and I stopped off to see how fast the current was." "You're lying. You can't really expect me to believe that. You'd better come clean at once." "I'll give Your Excellency a free shave twice, even 3 times a week. Honest, I will," answered Ivan Yakovlevich. "No, no, my friend, that won't do. 3 barbers look after me already, and it's an honor for them to shave me. Please tell me what you're up to." Ivan Yakovlevich turned pale, but at this point, everything became so completely enveloped in mist, it really is impossible to say what happened afterwards. There's a small break here, and we're going to take that small break, both so I can relight my joint, and to welcome anyone that has just shown up to our little reading. This is Adult Storytime. My name is Nick Knave, and this is a reason I gave myself to take a shower and get online. Now, part 2 of Nikolai Gogol's The Nose. I guess it's backwards on your screen, so it looks like Ilakin Logog, but it's not. Collegiate assessor Kovylov woke up rather early and made a brrrring noise with his lips. He always did this when he woke up, though, and if you asked him why, he could not give any good reason. Kovalyev stretched himself and asked for the small mirror that stood on the table to be brought over to him. He wanted to have a look at a pimple that had made its appearance on his nose the previous evening, but his extreme astonishment found that instead of a nose, there was nothing but an absolutely flat surface. In a terrible panic, Kovalyev asked for some water and rubbed it in his eyes with a towel. No mistake about it, his nose had gone. He began pinching himself to make sure he wasn't sleeping, but to all intents and purposes, he was wide awake. Collegiate assessor Kovalyev sprang out of bed and shook himself. Still no nose. He asked for his clothes, and off he dashed straight to the head of police. In the meantime, however, a few words should be said about Kovalyev, so that the reader may see what kind of collegiate assessor this man was. You really can't compare those collegiate assessors who acquire office through testimonials with the variety appointed in the Caucasus. The two species are quite distinct. Collegiate assessors with diplomas from learned bodies, but, excuse me, Russia is such an amazing country that if you pass any remark about one collegiate assessor, every assessor from Riga to Kamchatka will take it personally. And the same goes for all people holding titles in government ranks. Kovalyev belonged to the Caucasian variety. He had been a collegiate assessor for only 2 years, and therefore could not forget it for a single minute. To make himself sound more important and to give more weight to his status, he never called himself collegiate assessor, but major. If he ever met a woman in the street selling shirt fronts, he would say, "Listen, dear, come and see me at home. My flat's in Sadoiva Street. All you have to do is ask if Major Kovyalov is there, and anyone will show you the way." And if the woman was at all pretty, he would just whisper some secret instructions and then say, "Just ask for Major Kovyalov, my dear." Therefore, throughout this story, we will call this collegiate assessor Major. Major Kovalyev was in the habit of taking a daily stroll along the Nevsky Avenue. His shirt collar was always immaculately clean and well starched. His whiskers were the kind you usually find among provincial surveyors, architects, and regimental surgeons, among people who have some sort of connection with the police, or anyone, in fact, who has full rosy cheeks and plays a good hand at whist. These whiskers grew straight from the middle of his cheeks up to his nostrils. Major Kovalyev, Jesus Christ, Major Kovalyev always carried plenty of seals with him, seals bearing coats of arms or engraved with the words Wednesday, Thursday, Monday, and so on. Major Kovalyev had come to St. Petersburg with the set purpose of finding a position in keeping with his rank. If he was lucky, he would get a vice-governorship, but failing that, a job as an administrative clerk in some important government department would have to do. Major Kovalyev was not averse to marriage as long as his bride happened to be worth 200,000 rubles, and now the reader can judge for himself how this major felt when, instead of a fairly presentable and reasonably sized nose, all he saw was an absolutely preposterous, smooth, flat space. As if this were not bad enough, there was not a cab in sight, and he had to walk home, keeping himself huddled up in his cloak and with a handkerchief over his face to make people think he was bleeding.
But perhaps I dreamt it. How could I be so stupid as to go off and lose my nose?
With these thoughts, he dropped into a coffee house to take a look at himself in the mirror. Fortunately, the shop was empty, except for some waiters sweeping up and tidying the chairs. A few of them, rather bleary-eyed, were carrying trays laden with hot pies. Yesterday's newspapers, covered in coffee stains, lay scattered on tables and chairs.
"Well, thank God there's no one about," he said. "Now I could have a look."
He approached the mirror rather gingerly and peered into it.
"Damn it, what kind of trick is this?"
he cried, spitting on the floor.
"If only there was something to take its place, but there's nothing."
He bit his lip in annoyance. left the coffee house, and decided not to smile or look at anyone, which was not like him at all. Suddenly, he stood rooted to the spot near the front door of some house and witnessed a most incredible sight. A carriage drew up at the entrance porch. The doors flew open, and out jumped a uniformed, stooping gentleman who dashed up the steps. The feeling of horror and amazement that gripped Kovalyev when he recognized his own nose defies description. After this extraordinary sight, everything went topsy-turvy. He could hardly keep to his feet, but decided at all costs to wait until the nose returned to the carriage, although he was shaking all over and felt quite feverish. About 2 minutes later, a nose really did come out. It was wearing a gold-braided uniform with a high stand-up collar and chamois trousers, and had a sword at its side. From the plumes on its hat, one could tell that it held the exalted rank of state councilor, and it was abundantly clear that the nose was going to visit someone. It looked right, then left, then shouted to the coachman, "Let's go!" climbed in, and drove off. Poor Kovalyev nearly went out of his mind. He didn't know what to make of it. In fact, how could a nose which only yesterday was in the middle of his face and which could not possibly walk around or drive in a carriage suddenly turn up in a uniform? He ran after the carriage, which fortunately didn't travel very far, and came to a halt outside of the Kazan Cathedral. Kovalyev rushed into the cathedral square, elbowed his way through a crowd of beggar women who always used to make him laugh because of the ways they covered their faces. That's irony. Leaving only their slits for eyes, and made his way in. Only a few people were at prayer, all of them standing by the entrance. Kovalyev felt so distraught that he was in no condition for praying, and his eyes searched every nook and cranny for the nose in uniform. At length, he spotted it standing by one of the walls to the side. The nose's face was completely hidden by the high collar and was praying with an expression of profound piety.
What's the best way of approaching it?
Thought Kovalyev.
Judging by its uniform, its hat, and its whole appearance, it must be a state councilor. But I'm damned if I know.
He tried to attract its attention by coughing, but the nose did not interrupt its devotions for 1 second and continued bowing toward the altar.
But, my dear sir,
Kovalyev said, summoning his courage.
But, my dear sir.
What do you want? Replied the nose, turning around.
I don't know how to best put it, sir, but it strikes me as very peculiar. Don't you know where you belong? And where do I find you? At a church of all places. I'm sure you'll agree that...
Please forgive me, but would you mind telling me what you're talking about? Explain yourself.
How could I make myself clear?
Kovalyev wondered. Nerving himself once more, he said,
Of course, I am, as it happens, a major. You'll agree it's not done for someone in my position to walk around minus the nose. It's all right for some old woman selling peeled oranges on the Voskorensky Bridge to go around without one. But as I'm hoping to be promoted soon, besides, I'm acquainted with several highly placed ladies. Madame Chetravia, for example, a state councilor's wife. You could judge for yourself. I really don't know what to say, dear sir.
He shrugged his shoulders as he said this.
Forgive me, but you must look upon this as a matter of honor and principle. You can see for yourself.
I can't see anything, the nose replied. Please come to the point.
My dear sir, continued Kovalyev in a smug voice, I really don't know what you mean by that. It's plain enough for anyone to see, unless you... Don't you realize you're my nose?
The nose looked at the major and frowned a little.
My dear fellow, you are mistaken. I am a person in my own right. Furthermore, I don't see that we can have anything in common. Judging from your uniform buttons, I should say from another government department.
With these words, the nose turned away and continued with its prayers. Kovalyev was so confused he didn't know what to do or think. At that moment, he heard the pleasing rustle of a woman's dress, and an elderly lady, bedecked with lace, came by, accompanied by a slim girl wearing a white dress, which showed her shapely figure to very good advantage, and a pale yellow hat, light as a pastry. A tall footman with enormous whiskers and what seemed to be a dozen collars stationed himself behind them and opened his snuff box. Kovalyev went closer, pulled the linen collar of his shirt up front up hot. I'll try that again. Kovalyev went closer, pulled the linen collar of his shirt front up high, straightened the seals hanging on his gold watch chain, and, smiling all over his face, turned his attention to the slim girl who bent over to pray like a spring flower and kept lifting her little white hand with its almost transparent fingers to her forehead. The smile on Kovalyev's face grew even more expansive when he saw, beneath her hat, a little rounded chin of dazzling white and cheeks flushed with the color of the first rose of spring. But he suddenly jumped backwards as though he had been burnt. He remembered that instead of a nose, he had nothing. And tears streamed from his eyes. He turned round to tell the nose in uniform straight out that it was only masquerading as a state councilor, was an imposter, a scoundrel, and really nothing else other than his own private property, his nose. But the nose had already gone. It had managed to slip off unseen, probably to pay somebody a visit. This reduced Kovalyev to absolute despair. He went out and stood a minute or so under the colonnade, carefully looking around him in hope of spotting the nose. He remembered quite distinctly that it was wearing a plumed hat and a gold-embroidered uniform, but he had not noticed what its greatcoat was like, or the color of its carriage, or its horses, or even if there was a liveried footman at the back. What's more, there were so many carriages careering, I think that should have been careening. That was a typo. That was not me. I won't, if whoever's taking note, Haley, probably taking notes at how many times I mess up. That says it, careering, but it should have been careening. Careening to and fro so fast that, what's more, there were so many carriages careening to and fro so fast that it was practically impossible to recognize any of them. And even if he could, there was no way of making them stop. It was a beautiful sunny day. Nevsky Avenue was packed. From the police headquarters right down to the Anichkov Bridge, there's so many bridges in this. People flowed along the pavements in a cascade of color. Not far off, he could see that the court counselor, referred to as lieutenant colonel, especially if there happened to be other people around. And over there was Yagin, a head clerk in the Senate, and a very close friend of his, who always lost at whist when he played in a party of 8. Another major, a collegiate assessor of the Caucasian variety, waved to him to come over and have a chat.
"Blasted dab," said Kovalyev, hailing a Drotsky. "Driver, take me straight to the chief of police."
He climbed into the Drotsky and shouted,
"Drive like the devil!" "Is the police commissioner in?"
he said as soon as he entered the hall. No, he's not, sir," said the porter. "He left only a few minutes ago."
"This really is by day."
"Yes," added the porter. "You've only just missed him. A minute ago, you'd have caught him." Kovalyev, his handkerchief still pressed to his face, climbed into the Drotsky again and cried out in a despairing voice, "Let's go." "Where?" asked the driver.
"Straight on."
"Straight on? But it's a dead end here. You can only go right or left." This last question made Kovalyev stop and think. In his position, the best thing to do was to go first to the city security office, not because it was directly connected with the police, but because things got done there much quicker than in any other government department. There was no sense in going direct to the head of the department where the nose claimed to work, since anyone could see from the answers he had got before that the nose considered nothing holy and would have no difficulty in convincing its superiors by its brazen lying that it had never set eyes on Kovalyev before. So, just as Kovalyev was about to tell the driver to go straight to the security office, it struck him that the scoundrel and imposter who had behaved so shamelessly could quite easily take advantage of the delay and slip out of the city, in which event all his efforts to find it would be futile and might even drag on for another month, God forbid. Finally, inspiration came from above. He decided to go straight to the newspaper office and publish an advertisement, giving such a detailed description of the nose that anyone who happened to meet it would turn it over at once to Kovalyev, or at least tell him where he could find it. Deciding this was the best course of action, he ordered the driver to go straight to the newspaper offices, and throughout the whole journey, never once stopped pummeling the driver in the back with his fist and shouting, "Faster, damn you, faster!" But, sir, the driver retorted as he shook his head and flicked his reins at his horse, which had a coat as long as a spaniel's. Finally, the drosky came to a halt, and the breathless Kovalyev tore into a small waiting room where a gray-haired, bespectacled clerk in an old frock coat was sitting at a table with his pen between his teeth, counting out copper coins.
Who sees advertisements here?
Kovalyev shouted.
Ah, good morning.
Good morning, replied the gray-haired clerk, raising his eyes for 1 second, then looking down again at the little piles of money spread out on the table.
I want to publish an advertisement.
Just one moment, if you don't mind, the clerk answered as he wrote down a figure with one hand and moved 2 beads on his abacus with the other. A footman, who, judging by his gold-braided livery and generally very smart appearance, obviously worked in some noble house, was standing by the table holding a piece of paper, and just to show he could hobnob with high and low, started rattling away.
Believe me, that nasty little dog just isn't worth 80 kopecks. I wouldn't give more than 16 for it, but the Countess dotes on it, and that's why she makes no bones about offering 100 rubles to the person who finds it. If we're going to be honest with one another, I'll tell you quite openly, there's no accounting for taste. I can understand a fancier paying anything up to 500, and even 1,000 for a deerhound or a poodle, as long as it's a good dog.
The elderly clerk listened to him solemnly while he carried on trotting up the words in the advertisement. The room was crowded with old women, shopkeepers, and house reporters, all holding advertisements. In one of these, a coachman of sober disposition was seeking employment, and another carriage, hardly used and bought from Paris in 1814, was up for sale. In another, a 19-year-old servant girl with laundry experience and prepared to do other work was looking for a job. Other advertisements offered a drosky for sale in good condition, apart from one missing spring, a young and spirited dapple gray colt, 17 years old, radish and turnip seeds, only just arrived from London, a country house with every modern convenience, including stabling for 2 horses and enough land for planting an excellent birch or fir forest, and one invited prospective buyers of old boot soles to attend certain auction rooms between the hours of 8 and 3 daily. I lost my space. Here we go. The room to which all these people were crammed was small and extremely stuffy. But collegiate assessor Kovalyev could not smell anything, as he had covered his face with his handkerchief, and he could not have smelt anything anyways, as his nose had disappeared God knows where.
My dear sir, will you please take the details now, please? I really can't wait any longer,
he said, beginning to lose patience.
Just a minute, if you don't mind. 2 rubles, 43 kopecks, nearly ready. 1 ruble, 64 kopecks,
the gray-haired clerk muttered as he shoved pieces of paper at the old ladies and servants standing around. Finally, he turned to Kovalyev and said, "What do you want?"
I want,
Kovalyev began.
Something very fishy's been going on. Whether it's a nasty practical joke or a plain case of fraud, I can't say as yet. All I want you to do is to offer a substantial reward for the first person to find the blackguard.
Name, please?
Why do you need that? I can't tell you. Too many people know me. Mrs. Chikaria, for example, who's married to a state councilor. Mrs. Pelageya Pantochin, a staff officer's wife. They'd found out who it was at once, God forbid. Just put collegiate assessor, even better, put major. And the missing person was a household serf of yours? Household serf? The crime wouldn't be half as serious. It's my nose that's disappeared. Strange name. And did this Mr. Nose steal much? My nose, I'm trying to say. You don't understand. It's my own nose that's disappeared. It's a diabolical practical joke someone's played on me. How did it disappear? I don't follow. I can't tell you how, but please understand, my nose is traveling at this very moment all over town. It's calling itself a state councilor. And that's why I'm asking you to print this advertisement announcing the first person who catches it would return the nose to its rightful owner as soon as possible. Imagine what it's like being without such a conspicuous part of your body. If it were just a small toe, I could put my shoe on. No one would be the wiser. On Thursdays, I go to Mrs. Chektravyev, she's married to a state councilor, and Mrs. Potochin, who has a staff officer for a husband and a very pretty little daughter as well. They're close friends of mine. So just imagine what it would be like in my state. How could I visit any of them?
The clerk's tightly pressed lips showed he was deep in thought. I can't print an advertisement like that in our paper, he said after a long silence. Why not?
Why not? Sorry, I did the wrong voice there. Why not?
I'll tell you. A paper can get a bad name. If everyone started announcing his nose had run away, I don't know how it would all end, and enough false reports and rumors get past editorial already.
But why does it strike you as so absurd?
I certainly don't think so. Well, that's what you think. But only last week there was a similar case. Clerk came here with an advertisement just like you, cost him 2 rubles and 73 kopecks, and all he wanted to advertise was a runaway black poodle. Now, what do you think he was up to, really? Well, in the end, we had a libel case on our hands because the poodle was meant on a satire on a government cashier. I can't remember what ministry he came from.
But I want to publish an advertisement about my nose, not a poodle. That's as near myself as damn it.
No, I can't accept that kind of advertisement.
But I've lost my nose.
Then you'd better see a doctor about it. I've heard there's a certain kind of specialist who can fix you up with any kind of nose you like. Anyway, you seem a very cheery sort, and I can see you like to have a little joke.
By all that's holy, I swear I'm telling the truth. If you really want me to, I'll show you what I mean.
I shouldn't bother if I were you, the clerk continued, taking a pinch of snuff. However, if it's really no trouble, he added, leaning forward out of curiosity, that I shouldn't mind having a quick look. The collegiate assessor removed his handkerchief. Well, how very peculiar. It's quite flat, just like a freshly cooked pancake. Incredibly flat.
So much for your objections. Now you've seen it with your own eyes, and you can't possibly refuse. I'll be particularly grateful for this little favor, and it's been a real pleasure meeting you.
The major, evidently, had decided that flattery might do the trick. Of course, it's no problem printing the advertisement, the clerk said, but I can't see what you can stand to gain by it. If you like, why not give it to someone with a flair for journalism? Then he can write up as a very rare freak of nature and have it published in the Northern Bee. Here he took another pinch of snuff. So that young people might benefit from it. Here he wiped his nose. Or else as something of interest to the general public. The collegiate assessor's hopes vanished completely. He looked down at the bottom of the page at the theater guide. The name of a rather pretty actress almost brought a smile to his face, and he reached down to his pocket to see if he had a 5-ruble note, since in his opinion, staff officers should only sit in the stalls. But then he remembered his nose, and he knew he could not possibly think of going to the theater. Apparently, even the clerk was touched by Kovalyev's terrible predicament, and thought it would not hurt to cheer him up with a few words of sympathy. Really, I can't say how sorry I am as what's happened. How about a pinch of snuff? Very good for headaches, puts a fresh heart in you, even cures piles. With these words, he offered Kovalyev his snuff box, deftly flipping back the lid, which bore a portrait of some lady in a hat. It's my favorite type of snuff, is some lady in a hat. This unintentionally thoughtless action made Kovalyev lose his patience altogether.
I don't understand how you can joke at a time like this, he said angrily. Are you so blind that you can't see that I've nothing to smell with? You know what you can do with your snuff? I can't bear to look at it. And anyway, you might at least offer me some real French râpé, not that filthy Berezin bread. After this declaration, he strode furiously out of the newspaper office and went off to the local inspector of police, a fanatical lover of sugar whose hall and dining room were crammed full of sugar cubes presented by merchants who wanted to keep well in with him. Kovalyev arrived just when he was having a good stretch, grunting and saying, "Now for a nice 2 hours nap." Our collegiate assessor had nearly chosen a very bad time for his visit. The inspector was a great patron of the arts and industry, but most of all, he loved government banknotes. "There's nothing finer than banknotes," he used to say. "They don't need feeding, take up very little room, and slip nicely into the pocket, and they don't break if you drop them." The inspector gave Kovalyev a rather cold welcome and said that after dinner wasn't at all the time to start an investigation, that nature itself had decreed a rest after meals. From this, our collegiate assessor concluded the inspector was well versed in the wisdom of antiquity, that respectable men do not get their noses ripped off, and that there were no end of majors knocking around who were not too fussy about their underwear, who were in the habit of visiting the most disreputable places. These few home truths stung Kovalyev to the quick.
Here I must point out that Kovalyev was an extremely sensitive man. He did not so much mind people making personal remarks about him, but it was a different matter when aspersions were cast on his rank or social standing. As far as he was concerned, they could say what they liked about subalterns on the stage, but staff officers should be exempt from the attack. The reception given him by the inspector startled him so much that he shook his head, threw out his arms, and said in a dignified voice,
To be frank, after these remarks of yours, which I find very offensive, I have nothing more to say,
and walked out. He arrived home hardly able to feel his feet beneath him. It was already getting dark. After his fruitless inquiries, his flat seemed extremely dismal and depressing. As he entered the hall, he saw his footman, Ivan, lying on a soiled leather couch, spitting at the ceiling, managing to hit the same spot with a fair degree of success. The nonchalance of the man infuriated him, and Kovalyev hit him across the forehead with his hat and said,
You fat pig, haven't you anything better to do?
Ivan promptly jumped up and rushed to take off Kovalyev's coat. Tired and depressed, the major went to his room, threw himself into an armchair, and after a few sighs said,
my God, what have I done to deserve this? If I'd lost an arm or a leg, it wouldn't be so bad. Even without any ears, things wouldn't be very pleasant, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. A man without a nose, though, is God knows what. Neither fish nor fowl, just something to be thrown out of the window. If my nose had been lopped off during the war, or in a duel, at least I might have had some say in the matter. But to lose it for no reason at all, and with nothing to show for it, not even a kopeck, no, it's absolutely impossible. It can't have gone like that. Never. Must have been a dream. Or perhaps I drank some of that vodka I used for rubbing down my beard after shaving instead of water. That idiot Ivan couldn't have put it back in the cupboard. To prove to himself he was not drunk, the major pinched himself so hard he cried out in pain, which really did convince him he was awake and in full possession of his senses. He stealthily crept over to the mirror and screwed his eyes in the hope that his nose would reappear in its proper place. But at once he jumped back, exclaiming, That ridiculous blank space again! It was entirely incomprehensible. If a button or a silver spoon or his watch or something of that sort had been missing, it would have been understandable. But for his nose to disappear from his own flat, Major Kovalyev weighed up all the evidence and decided the most likely explanation of all of it was that Mrs. Potochin, the staff officer's wife, who wanted to marry off her daughter to him, was to blame, and no one else. In fact, he liked chasing after her, but never came to proposing. And when the staff's officer wife used to tell him straight out that she was offering him her daughter's hand, he would politely withdraw, excusing himself on the grounds that he was still a young man, and that he wanted to devote another 5 years to the service, by which time he would be just 42. So, to get her revenge, the staff officer's wife must have hired some witches to spirit away, and this was the only way his nose could possibly have been cut off. No one had visited him in his flat. His barber, Ivan Yakovlevich, had shaved him only last Wednesday, and the rest of that day and the whole of Thursday, his nose had been intact. All this he remembered quite clearly. Moreover, he would have been in pain, and the wound could and not... Oh, excuse me. That's the champagne. That's the glamorous part of my life right there. And when the blah, 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 blah. So to get a revenge, the staff officer's wife must have hired some witches to spirit it away. And this was the only way his nose could possibly have been cut off. No one had visited him in his flat. His barber, Ivan Yakovlevich, had shaved him only last Wednesday. And the rest of that day and the whole of Thursday, his nose had been intact. All this he remembered quite clearly. Moreover, he would have been in pain, and the wound could not have healed as smooth as a pancake in such a short time. He began planning what to do. Either he would sue a staff's officer's wife for damages, or he would go and see her personally and accuse her point blank. But he was distracted from these thoughts by the sight of some chinks of light in the door, which meant Ivan had lit a candle in the hall. Soon afterwards, Ivan appeared in person, holding the candle in front of him, so that it brightened up the whole room.
Kovalyev's first reaction was to seize his handkerchief and cover up the bare place where only yesterday his nose had been, to prevent that stupid idiot from standing there gaping at him. No sooner had Ivan left than a strange voice was heard in the hall. "Does Collegiate Assessor Kovalyev live here?"
"Please come in, the major's home,"
said Kovalyev, springing to his feet and opening the door. A smart-looking police officer with plump cheeks and whiskers that were neither too light nor too dark, the same police officer who had stood on St. Isaac's Bridge at the beginning of our story, made his entrance. Oh, I guess I should have used a different voice for that then. My apologies.
"Are you the gentleman who has lost his nose?"
"Yes, that's me."
"It's been found."
"What did you say?"
cried Major Kovalyev. He could hardly speak for joy. He looked wide-eyed at the police officer, the candlelight flickering on his fat cheeks and thick lips.
"How did you find it?"
"Very strange. We caught it just as it was about to drive off in the Riga stagecoach. Its passport was made out in the name of some civil servant. Strangely enough, I mistook it for a gentleman at first. Fortunately, I had my spectacles with me so I could see it was really a nose. I'm very short-sighted, and if you happen to stand just in front of me, I can only make out your face, but not your nose or beard or anything else. In fact, my mother-in-law, that's to say my wife's side, suffers from the same complaint." Kovalyev was beside himself.
"Well, where is it? I'll go right away and claim it."
"Don't excite yourself, sir. I know how much you wanted it back, so I've brought it with me. Very strange. But the main culprit in this little affair seems to be that swindler of a barber from Voznesky Street. He's down at the station now. Had my eyes on him for a long time on suspicion of drunkenness and larceny, and only 3 days ago he was found stealing a dozen buttons from a shop. You'll find your nose just as it was when you lost it." The police officer dipped into his pocket and pulled out the nose wrapped in a piece of paper.
"That's it!"
cried Kovalyev.
"No mistake. You must stay and have a cup of tea."
"I'd like to, but I'm expected back at the prison. The price of food has rocketed. My mother-in-law, on my wife's side, is living with me, and all the children as well. The eldest boy seems promising, very bright, but we haven't the money to send him to school." Kovalyev guessed what he was after and took a note from the table and pressed it into the officer's hands. The police officer bowed very low and went out into the street, where Kovalyev could hear him telling some stupid peasant who had driven his cart up on the pavement that he thought of him. When the police officer had gone, our collegiate assessor felt rather bemused, and only after a few minutes did he come to his senses at all, so intense was his joy. He carefully took the nose in his cupped hands and once more subjected it to close scrutiny.
"Yes, that's it," Major Kovalyev said. "And there's the pimple that came up yesterday on the left-hand side."
The major almost laughed with joy. But nothing is lasting in this world. Even joy begins to fade after only 1 minute. 2 minutes later, and it's weaker still until finally it's swallowed up in our everyday, prosaic state of mind, just as a ripple made by a pebble gradually merges with the smooth surface of the water. After some thought, Kovalyev concluded that all was not right again, and there still remained the problem of putting the nose back in place.
"What if it doesn't stick?"
With a feeling of inexpressible horror, he rushed to the table and pulled the mirror nearer. As he was afraid that he might stick the nose on crooked, his hands trembled. With great care and caution, he pushed it into place, but oh, the nose just would not stick. He warmed it a little by pressing it to his mouth and breathing on it, then pressed it again to the smooth space between his cheeks, but try as he might, the nose would not stay on.
"Stay on, you fool,"
he said, though the nose seemed to be like made of wood, and fell onto the table with strange cork-like sounds. The major's face quivered convulsively.
"Perhaps I can graft it,"
he said apprehensively, but no matter how many times he tried to put it back, all his efforts were futile. He called Ivan and told him to fetch the doctor, who happened to live on the same block, in one of the best flats on the first floor. This doctor was a handsome man, with fine whiskers as black as pitch, and a fresh-looking, healthy wife. Every morning he used to eat apples and was terribly meticulous about keeping his mouth clean, spending at least 3/4 of an hour rinsing it out every day and using 5 different varieties of toothbrush. He came right away. When he had asked if the major had had this trouble for very long, the doctor pushed back Kovalyev's chin and prodded him with his thumb in the spot once occupied by his nose, so sharply that the major hit the wall very hard with the back of his head. The doctor told him not to worry and made him stand a little away from the wall and lean his head first to the right. Pinching the place where his nose had been, the doctor said, Then ordered him to move his head to the left, and proceeded another, Finally, he prodded him again, making Kovalyev's head twitch like a horse having its teeth inspected. After this examination, the doctor shook his head and said, "It's no good. It's best to stay as you are. Otherwise, you'll only make it worse. Of course, it's possible to have it stuck on, and I could do this for you quite easily, but I assure you, it would look terrible."
"That's marvelous, that is. How could I carry on without a nose?" says Kovalyev. "Whatever you do, it couldn't look any worse, and God knows that's bad enough. How could I go around looking like a freak? I mix with nice people. I'm expected at 2 soirees today. I know nearly all the best people. Mrs. Chekchavyev, a state counselor's wife. Mrs. Pachachin, she's a staff officer's wife. After the way she's behaved, I won't have anything more to do with her, except when I get the police on her trail." Kovalyev went on pleading, "Please do me this one favor. Isn't there any way? Even if you only get it to hold on, it wouldn't be so bad. And if there were any risk of it falling off, I could keep it there with my hand. I don't dance, which is a help, because any violent movement might make it drop off. And you can rest assured I wouldn't be slow in showering my appreciation, as far as my pocket will allow, of course."
The doctor then said in a voice which could not be called loud or even soft, but persuasive and arresting, "I never practice my art from a purely mercenary motive. That is contrary to my mode of conduct and all professional ethics. True, I make a charge for private visits, but only so as not to offend patients by refusing to take their money. Of course, I could put your nose back if I wanted to, but I give you my word of honor. If you know what's good for you, it would be far worse if I tried. Let nature take its course. Wash the area as much as you can with cold water, and believe me, you'll feel just as good as when you had a nose. Now, as far as the nose is concerned, put it in a jar of alcohol. Better still, soak it in 2 tablespoons of sour vodka and warmed up vinegar, and you'll get good money for it. I'll take it myself if you don't want it."
"No, I wouldn't sell it for anything," Kovalyev cried desperately. "I'd rather lose it again."
"Then I'm sorry," replied the doctor, bowing himself out. "I wanted to help you. At least I've tried hard enough." With these words, the doctor made a very dignified exit. Kovalyev did not even look at his face, and felt so dazed that all he could make out were the doctor's snowy white cuffs sticking out from the sleeves of his black dress coat. The very next day he decided, before going to the police, to write to the staff officer's wife to ask her to put back in its proper place what belonged to him without further ado. Oh, excuse me. The letter read as follows.
"Dear Mrs. Alexandra Grigoryevyna, I cannot extend this strange behavior on your part. You can be sure, though, you won't get anywhere, and you certainly won't force me to marry your daughter. Moreover, you can rest assured that regarding my nose, I'm familiar with the whole history of this affair from the very beginning, and I also know that you and no one else are the prime instigator. Its sudden detachment from its rightful place, its subsequent flight, its masquerading as a civil servant, and then its reappearance in its natural state are nothing else than the result of black magic carried out by yourself or by those practicing the same very honorable art. Now, I consider it my duty to warn you that if the above-mentioned nose is not back in its proper place by today, I shall be compelled to ask for the law's protection. I remain, dear madam, your very faithful servant, Platon Kovalyov." Oh, I fucked that one up again, didn't I? Kovalyov. No, I got it right. Okay, great. Sorry. I can stop talking about it. "Dear Mr. Kovalyov, I was simply staggered by your letter. To be honest, I never expected anything of this kind from you, particularly those remarks which are quite uncalled for. I would have you know I have never received that civil servant mentioned by you in my house, whether disguised or not. True, Philip Ivanovich Potashnivikov, although he wanted to ask for my daughter's hand, and despite the fact that he was very sober, respectable, and a learned gentleman, I never gave him cause for any hope. And then you go on to mention your nose. If by this you mean to say I want to make you look foolish, that is to put you off at the formal refusal, then all I can say is that I am very surprised that you can talk like this. As you know well enough, my feelings on the matter are quite different. And if you care to make an official proposal to my daughter, I will gladly give my consent, for this has always been my dearest wish, and in this hope I remain at your disposal Yours sincerely, Alexandra Potochin. No, said Kovalyev when he read the letter. She's not to blame. Impossible. Oh, a guilty person would never write a letter like that.
The collegiate assessor knew what he was talking about in this case, as he had been sent to the Caucasus several times to carry out legal inquiries.
How on earth did this happen then? It's impossible to make head or tail of it,
he said, letting his arms drop to his side. Meanwhile, not meanwhiles, just the one. Meanwhile, rumors about the strange occurrence had spread throughout the capital, not, need we say, without a few embellishments. At the time, everyone seemed preoccupied with the supernatural. Only a short time before, some experiments in magnetism had been all the rage. Besides, the story of dancing figures in, here we go again, Konyusheny Street was still fresh in people's minds. So no one was particularly surprised to hear about collegiate assessor Kovalyov's, oh look at that, nose taking a regular stroll along the Nevsky Avenue at exactly 3 o'clock every afternoon. Every day, crowds of inquisitive people flocked there. Someone said they'd seen the nose in Junker's store and produced such a crush outside the police had to be called. One fairly respectable-looking bewhiskered character, who sold stale cakes outside the theater, knocked together some solid-looking wooden benches and hired them out at 80 kopecks a time for people to stand on. One retired colonel left home especially early one morning and after a great struggle managed to barge his way through to the front. But to his great annoyance, instead of a nose in the shop window, all he could see was an ordinary woolen jersey and a lithograph showing a girl adjusting her stocking while a dandy with a small beard and a cutaway waistcoat peered out at her from behind a tree, a picture which had hung there in that identical spot for more than 10 years. He left feeling very cross and was heard to say, "Misleading the public with such ridiculous and far-fetched stories shouldn't be allowed." Something just rang. I guess I forgot to turn off my email. Sorry about that. Afterwards, it was rumored that Major Kovalyev's nose was no longer to be seen strolling along the Nevsky Avenue, but it was in the habit of walking in Tavrikesky Park, and that it had been doing this for a long time. When Kozlov Mertzel lived there, he was astonished at this freak of nature. Some of the students from the College of Surgeons went to have a look. One well-known, very respectable lady wrote specifically to the head park keeper, asking him to show her children this rare phenomenon and, if possible, give them an instructive and edifying commentary at the same time. These events came as a blessing to those socialites, indispensable for any successful party, who loved amusing the ladies and whose stock of stories was completely exhausted at the time. A few respectable and high-minded citizens were very upset. One indignant gentleman said that he was at a loss to understand how such absurd cock and bull stories could gain currency in the present enlightened century, and that the complete indifference shown by the authorities was past comprehension. Clearly, this gentleman was the type who likes to make the government responsible for everything, even their daily quarrels with their wives. And afterwards, but here again, the whole incident becomes enveloped in a mist, and what happened later remains a complete mystery. The world is full of the most outrageous nonsense. Sometimes things happen which you would hardly think possible. That very same nose, which had paraded itself as a state councilor and created such an uproar in the city, suddenly turned up, as if nothing had happened, plonk where it had been before, right between Major Kovalyev's two cheeks. This was on the 7th of April. He woke up and happened to glance at the mirror. There was his nose! He grabbed it with his hand to make sure, but there was no doubt this time. Aha! Cried Kovalyev, and if Ivan hadn't come at that very moment, he would have joyfully danced a trepak around the room in his bare feet. He ordered some soap and water, and as he washed himself, looked into the mirror again. His nose was there. He had another look as he dried himself. Yes, the nose was still there. Look, Ivan, I think I've got a pimple on my nose, Kovalyev thought. God, supposing he replies, not only is there no pimple, but no nose either. But Ivan answered, Your nose is quite all right, sir. I can't see any pimple. Thank God for that, the major said to himself and clicked his fingers. At this moment, Ivan Yakovlevich, the barber, poked his head around the corner, but timidly this time, like a cat which had just been beaten for stealing fat. Before you start, are your hands clean? Kovalyev shouted from the other side of the room. Perfectly clean. You're lying. On my life, sir, they're clean. Let's have a look at them. Kovalyev sat down. Ivan Yakovlevich covered him with a towel and in a twinkling had transformed his whole beard and part of his cheeks into the kind of cream served up at merchants' birthday parties. Well, I'll be damned, Ivan Yakovlevich muttered to himself, staring at the nose. He put Kovalyev's head to one side and looked at him from a different angle. That's it, all right. Never credit it. He continued and contemplated the nose for a long time, finally, ever so gently, with a delicacy that the reader can best imagine. He lifted 2 fingers to hold the nose by its tip. This is how Ivan Yakovlevich normally shaved his customers. Come on now and mind my nose, shouted Kovalyev. Ivan Yakovlevich let his arms fall to his side and stood there more frightened and embarrassed than he had ever been in his life. At last, he started tickling Kovalyev carefully under the chin with the razor, and although with only his olfactory organ to hold on to without any other means of support, and it made shaving very awkward, by planting his rough, wrinkled thumb on his cheek and lower gum, in this way gaining some sort of leverage, he managed to shave him. When everything was ready, Kovalyev rushed to get dressed and took a cab straight to the cafe. He had hardly got inside before he shouted, "Waiter, a cup of chocolate!" and then went straight up to the mirror. Yes, his nose was there. Gaily he turned around, screwed up his eyes, and looked superciliously at 2 soldiers, one of whom had a nose no bigger than a waistcoat button. They went off to the ministerial department where he was petitioning for vice-governorship. Failing this, he was going to try for an administrative post. As he crossed the entrance hall, he had another look in the mirror. His nose was still there. Then he went to see another collegiate assessor, or major, a great wag whose sly digs Kovalyev used to counter by saying, "I'm used to your quips by now, you old joker." On the way, he thought, if the major doesn't split his sides when he sees me, that's a sure sign everything is in its proper place. But then the collegiate assessor did not pass any remarks. It's all right then, damn it, thought Kovalyev. In the street, he met Mrs. Potochin, the staff officer's wife, who was with her daughter, and they replied to his bow with a delighted exclamation. Clearly, he had suffered no lasting injury. He had a long chat with them, made a point of taking out a snuff box, and stood there for ages, ostentatiously stuffing both his nostrils as he murmured to himself, "That'll teach you, you old hens, and I'm not going to marry your daughter, simply par more, as they say, if you don't mind." And from that time onwards, Major Kovalyev was able to stroll along the Nevsky Avenue, visit the theater, in fact, go everywhere as though absolutely nothing had happened. And as though absolutely nothing had happened, his nose stayed in the middle of his face and showed no signs of wandering off. After he was in perpetual high spirits, always smiling, chasing all the pretty girls, and on one occasion even stopping at a small shop on the Gostiny Dvor, again, Russian, no idea, to buy ribbon for some metal. No one knows why, as he did not belong to any sort of knighthood. All of this took place in the northern capital of our vast empire. Only now, after much reflection, can we see that there's a great deal that is very far-fetched in the story. Apart from the fact that it is highly unlikely for a nose to disappear in such a fantastic way and then reappear in various parts of town dressed as a state councilor, it's hard to believe that Kovalyev was so ignorant as to think that newspapers would accept advertisements about noses. I'm not saying I consider such an advertisement too expensive and a waste of money. That's nonsense. And what's more, I don't think I'm a mercenary person, but it's all very nasty and not quite the thing at all. And it makes me feel very awkward. And come to think of it, how did the nose manage to turn up in a loaf of bread? And how did Ivan Yakovlevich? You know what? I don't understand it. Not one bit. But the strangest, most incredible thing of all is that authors should write about such things. That, I confess, is beyond my comprehension. It's just, no, I don't understand it at all. Firstly, it's no use to the country whatsoever. Secondly, it's no use, well, I don't know what one can make of it. But when one is all said and done, one can concede this point or the other, and perhaps you can even find, well, you won't find much that isn't on the absurd side, will you? And yet, if you stop to think for a moment, there's a grain of truth in it. Whatever you may say, these things do happen. Rarely, I admit, but they do happen. And that is The Nose by Nikolai Gogol, or Harlequin Logog, as it looks on your screen. Thank you so much for joining me on my very first adult story time. I hope that wasn't terribly boring. Most of you, all of you, probably know me on Facebook, so tell me what you like. Tell me what you'd like to see differently formatted. tell me what story you'd like me to read. I'm trying to stick with old copyright-free stuff because I don't want to get sued by any authors or anything. But I'm going to flip on the chat again. I don't even know what time it is. Oh, great. Okay, hey, look at that. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Yay, cheers. Thank you. Yes, right. The lighting, right, Anna? Am I wrong? That makes such a difference. Also, I even got a dimmer. Oh, that part, don't get sued. Right, yes. Well, thank you all so much. I'm so happy that people liked it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. I'm getting such nice texts. Love you all. And again, thank you for giving me a reason to take a shower and shave, because the only people I hang out with are dogs, and they don't care, honestly. So I take full advantage of. Okay, well, I guess I'm going to end the stream. Thank you all so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to everybody that came in. Thank you to everybody that watched all the way. Thank you to everybody that popped in and out. Oh, Otto knows me? Of course Otto knows me. Thank you. I know it was classy, though. The whole setup I thought was nice. But I'm going to try and find a place with a fireplace. I don't know if that's actual sign language. And I'm going to try and find a place with a fireplace. Okay. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.